Shalom and welcome back to the channel. Today I want to discuss a very well-known passage in Ephesians. It is the passage where Paul writes, "For by grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast." Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9. Now this passage is often quoted, and many times, especially within the Gentile Christian world, it is quoted in a way that creates a very shallow understanding of grace, faith, and works. The common idea sounds something like this. Grace means God gives something completely free. Faith means I simply believe something in my mind. And because salvation is not works, I do not have to physically demonstrate that faith in any tangible way. In other words, grace becomes something inward only. Faith becomes something mental only, and works becomes something automatically opposed to grace. But biblically speaking, that framework needs to be challenged, because Paul is not saying that grace produces a life without obedience. Paul is not saying that faith is an invisible thought with no outward evidence. And Paul is certainly not saying that the righteous standards of God, i.e. the Torah, are now irrelevant. So let's slow down and define a few terms. First, grace. In Hebrew, the idea of grace or favor is connected to the Hebrew word chen. And this is important because chen does not mean God is careless, arbitrary, or indifferent to righteousness. In the Bible, grace is just another way of saying favor. But more specifically, grace is merited favor. It is not unmerited favor. Now hear me clearly. Grace is merited. It is not unmerited. It may be true that you and I did not merit it, but that does not mean it was not merited. Someone merited it. And in this passage, that someone is Messiah. It is Messiah who merited the favor. It is the Messiah who was faithful to his Father unto death. It is Messiah who obeyed. It is Messiah who secured the favor of God on behalf of all those who trust in him. So when Paul says we are saved by grace, he is not saying that God simply ignores righteousness. He is saying that Gentiles are rescued through the favor that has been secured through Messiah. That favor comes from kindness, mercy, and faithfulness of God. But it is actualized, it is brought to us through the obedience and faithfulness of the Messiah. So now that we understand grace as merited favor, we can begin to hear Paul more clearly. Paul is pointing us to the favor secured through Messiah, not to a careless idea of grace that requires no faithfulness, no transformation, and no visible change in the life of the believer. In other words, Gentiles are not being rescued because they changed their legal status through conversion, i.e. becoming Jewish. They are being rescued because of the faithfulness, because of the merited favor that Messiah earned. They are being brought near because of Messiah. They are being included in the kingdom because of the faithfulness and favor of Messiah. Second, we need to define the word saved. When the Bible speaks of being saved, the idea is rescue. To be saved means to be rescued from something. It means to be delivered from danger. It means to be brought out from impending judgment, destruction, or bondage. So when Paul says, by grace are ye saved, he is not talking about a vague religious feeling. He is talking about rescue from the present evil age. And in Paul's day, that's the pagan world of the Gentile. So it's being rescued from pagan darkness and sin, rescued from the judgment that is coming upon the world. Next. Third, we need to define faith. Faith, biblically speaking, is not merely a thought in the mind. Faith is not stagnant. Faith is not passive. The Hebrew concept of faith, emunah, carries the idea of faithfulness, trust, firmness, and loyalty. Faith is active. Faith moves. Faith is demonstrated. Faith is seen in the way a person lives. So when Gentiles place their faith in the Jewish Messiah, that faith should result in a changed life. They are no longer to live as pagans. They are no longer to walk according to the ways of the nations. They are no longer to live in idolatry, uncleanness, and rebellion. Their trust in Messiah should be seen in their conduct. Next, before we read any biblical letter, we always need to ask several important questions. For example, who is the author? To whom is the correspondence being written to? Why is it being written? What was the issue being addressed? Because if we do not ask such critical questions, we will often take a passage out of context and force it into a later theological debate that, in this case, Paul was not actually having. So what is happening in Ephesians? Paul is writing as the apostle to the Gentiles. And one of the major issues Paul continually deals with is the place of the Gentiles within the people of God. Questions such as, can Gentiles be included in the kingdom without undergoing circumcision? Can Gentiles be brought near without becoming legally Jewish? Can Gentiles become fellow heirs without a formal conversion of status? These are the arguments, or basically the one sustained argument throughout his letters. And this is why Paul speaks of my gospel. His message was that Gentiles through Messiah could be included among the people of God without first becoming Jews through circumcision. So when Paul says, not of works, lest any man should boast, we have to ask, what works does Paul have in mind? Is Paul attacking obedience to God? Is Paul attacking righteousness? Is Paul attacking the holy standards of the Almighty, i.e. the Torah? Absolutely not. In this context, Paul is addressing the question of covenant status. He is saying that Gentiles are not rescued by performing the works that mark out Jewish covenant identity. That is, circumcision of the flesh. They are not saved by undergoing a legal conversion. They are not brought near because they became Jewish. On the contrary, they are brought near by grace through faith. They are rescued by the favor that Messiah earned. That means the Gentile believer has no reason to boast. Why? Because he did not create his own access. He did not earn his place through conversion, that is, getting circumcised. He did not force his way into the covenant people by changing his ethnic or legal identity. He was brought near by the mercy and favor of God through Messiah. But that does not mean he now lives without obedience. That does not mean faith is merely mental. That does not mean grace cancels transformation. In fact, the very next verse says, for we are his workmanship, created in Messiah Yeshua, unto good works, which God hath before ordained that we should walk in them. Because what's being said there is that God is the one that is doing the altering, not the Gentile himself. So, Paul does not say we are saved by works, but he absolutely says we are created unto good works. He is speaking to Gentiles who were once far off, Gentiles who were once dead in trespasses and sins, Gentiles who once walked according to the course of this world, Gentiles who were once strangers for the covenants of promise, and now through Messiah they have been brought near, not by circumcision, not by legal conversion, not by boasting in the flesh, but by and through grace and faith, by the favor of God, through the faithfulness of Messiah, resulting in a new life of obedience, loyalty, and good works. So I hope that helps bring some clarity to Paul's words. There is much more that I could say about this, but because of time, I only wanted to introduce the issue and help us begin thinking about this passage in its proper biblical context. And stay tuned, because I hope to begin a study through Galatians soon. But in order to do that, I need your help. Please go to my YouTube channel at The Gospel of Torah and subscribe. I would love to build enough of a following to begin doing live teachings, and I would be honored to have you there. Thank you for watching, or in this case, listening. May the faithfulness of the Messiah and the Spirit of truth keep you until his kingdom comes. Shalom.